Hey everybody, Ty here. I hope everyone's doing well. Major apology, by the way. It's been a really busy day for me, so I'm not getting. This video isn't going to be going up until a lot later than what I'm used to doing, and I apologize for that. Appreciate all of you that do tune in right now. Just a reminder, make sure you have that notification bell on because I don't know how good of a job YouTube is doing with putting my videos out, so just make sure you're keeping your eye out because things are about to get busy here. Normally, when I start one of these forecast videos, I don't always pull up the CPC page unless there's going to be a big shift in the weather pattern. And while it doesn't necessarily come in time for the Thanksgiving holiday, it does come towards the end of the month. And we're now within that 16-day range to now look at those first couple of days in December. And another big indicator of that is, of course, by sometimes taking a look at the Climate Prediction Center website. And what we have noticed is, of course, for right now, we're well above average over a large part of the lower 48, especially with the temperatures. But notice that the precipitation map is pretty active as well now over most of the lower 48, especially as we get towards the Thanksgiving week. We actually end up seeing a higher probability of above average precipitation as a whole over just about the entire country. There's only one small area, and I mean one small area entirely, and that's just over this tiny corner of California here, where we have a chance for below average precip along with far southeastern Alaska. Everywhere else, we're expecting above average precipitation or near normal levels. And then it gets even more interesting as we go to the 8 to 14 day outlook. You're starting to see the cold air beginning to sneak in there. You can see it here. And then watch what happens as we go into the 3 and 4 week outlooks here. Now, I'm not going to go too far into detail with this because obviously at this range, trying to get a handle on 21 plus days out is crazy. Just sometimes doing 2 weeks is already crazy enough. But pretty robust signal, especially in regards to the temperatures here. And the flip is going to be significant enough to where a lot of these areas over towards the southeast in general, for example, which have been drier than average for the most part, are now possibly going to see above average precip along with kind of a battle zone kind of occurring here up towards the Ohio and maybe even Tennessee valleys over here. Over towards the southeast, we're still expected to be above average there. I think the southeast ridge really is going to be the big reason as to why that is. But if we were to go ahead and take a look at the 3 to 4 week outlook, as I mentioned before, with the precipitation too, notice a lot of the eastern half of the U.S. now is looking pretty active. You're still seeing some action here towards the northwest and the northern Rockies as well, which is not a surprise for this time of year, but this is also going to be the origin where a lot of cold air is coming from too. So it does lead me to think that this could be leaning more into a pattern where I would think that maybe some winter weather might be in the equation. How far south that dips is still to be determined at this point. But we mentioned it in the fall outlooks in the past here that this season could be kind of wacky, and it could even be wacky towards the start of winter. We're living up to expectation right now. We've been dealing with some pretty big temperature jumps, and I would at least expect one more here. Meteorological winter technically starts on December 1st, so this isn't too far out of character for our weather in this season, but definitely expect some big changes going forward here. Also, with the way the weather pattern has been in general, especially with the warmer air mass kind of dominating over the lower 48, severe weather is not going to be much of a problem, at least heading throughout most of this week. Once we get towards day 4 and beyond here, we start to see predictability to low tags coming back in. I don't expect any heightened severe weather risk. You might see a few more marginal risks come in towards the back half of the week, maybe go even extending into next week. There is a couple of troughs that I'm extremely interested in, and we're going to do things a little bit different today, where we're actually going to show the troughing of the GFS at the upper levels of the atmosphere, and then we're actually going to fuse that with the cold air masses that we're seeing here. So what I want you to pay attention to, and we're going to try to time this as best as we can here, and this isn't going, but what you can see here is here's our trough here, and this is the cold air mass associated along with this. And what I've always said about these troughs is these often can be big time troublemakers depending on how these deepen. So sometimes the sharper the trough here, the more cold air comes in, interacts with the warm air out ahead of it. That's how you get your severe storms, your snowstorms sometimes as well. Notice towards the very end of the model run here, we see some pretty significant stuff beginning to pop up here. The one that I've been kind of harping on over the last week in particular, there's been a few changes with it. It was originally this one that kind of pops up over here between the 19th and the 20th. I'm going to go ahead and pause this to go along with that. So this is that same exact trough right here, this little cold air mass associated along with it. If we move this forward, notice there's a new trough that comes in right behind it and actually ends up kicking this one out. You can look on the smaller part of the screen to see what I'm doing right now. So this ultimately might mitigate some of that severe weather risk that we would maybe be looking at over towards the Gulf Coast states and maybe even towards the southern plains. But now this new trough here might have a better chance for severe weather. And this trough becomes a little bit more stout. The question is, with this becoming more cut off in the early going and the timing of this could maybe become a system that affects the Thanksgiving holiday itself if it holds together. Because notice as it becomes cut off on here and both on here, you'll notice that it starts to fall apart. So it's kind of a interesting scenario. If this thing were to somehow deepen a bit more, which doesn't really seem likely at this point, a lot of model data has been kind of going against it. We might have a more significant severe situation, but this should ultimately keep things pretty tame. Now the other interesting thing behind it is there's another trough that pops up here that deepens, and this is how we end up getting a little bit of a sneaky cold shot for the northern states. And for a brief period, it even becomes a thing towards the eastern half of the U.S. Now, if you remember what it was like earlier this month, it kind of had a similar layout to what we're seeing here. So, again, this is what it looks like on the jet stream map that I usually will show you guys. But on here, you can see the core of where the coldest temperatures are expected to be. Now, how this ends up shaping up in regards to winter weather, jury, of course, is still kind of out on that. I'm not really willing to go into just what exactly could come of that, but that is definitely a signal I've been seeing at least on the GFS. The Euro's not really there right now, and during this time of night, which is why I normally don't post these videos during this time, is because the Euro has less hours available on its run in comparison to the lunchtime models. We have 360 hours or 15 days to work with on that versus 6 days during the lunchtime or dinner time models, which are like 6 o'clock and beyond. So a little bit tougher to make that work. But in any case, though, let's see how this troughing also correlates with our temperatures here. So let's go ahead and put both of these on. And you can see the troughing here coming into play. You can see how the warm air is kind of corresponding with the ridging that we have going on as well. And if you continue to move this forward, I know the timing's just a little bit off, but you can almost even kind of see it whenever that cold air really starts to dive in. So that's on the 25th, this is 26th now. You can see how that cold air starts to take that nosedive in towards the south here, and especially as we get towards the back half of the model run towards the beginning of December, things really look like they start to get more interesting as we go forward here. So a couple things that we'll be looking for, of course, is we're going to be mainly keeping our eye on this system on the 24th to see what it ends up doing. Now, like I said, this is not going to, if this becomes a severe setup, it's definitely not going to be of the textbook variety. It's going to be kind of a messy setup, if anything, where we would have a lot of messy showers and thunderstorms with maybe regional or maybe even local severe impacts, but you're not going to see your large-scale severe weather outbreaks or anything of the like from this one too quickly. Now, keep in mind, things can evolve very quickly with the atmosphere. It's very fickle, so don't take what I'm saying now as the final word. But with that in mind, let's keep the ball rolling here, and we're actually going to do a thing where we make a comparison with the dew points to go along with our temperature map here, or actually I think I'm going to change it up and actually keep this with the trough here. But instead of going through a full loop, we're going to go ahead and take a look at that first system, which is going to be right at about 100 hours out, I would say. And what I'm looking for really at this point is any surge of moisture here. Because right around here, where we have our short waves kind of popping up here, is going to be where our chance for severe weather would most likely be. Maybe a little bit further off towards the south, I would say, at this point. But like I said, kind of a liquid situation in regards to how the atmosphere is set up based off what we're looking at now. I do think there's going to be further changes with this. And like I said, with this system starting to deteriorate as this one's starting to move in, it kind of complicates the forecast a little bit more. But one thing that does seem to be certain here is the fact that over towards this region seems to be our point of interest for our storms. Because our moisture, it matches up right around this area here if you're looking at the dew point part of the screen here and matching it with this here. This is where this is our moisture nose that pops up here. And then we'll have our lower level winds pushing in a little bit further from the south. It's not going to be strong directional shear though, so it's going to be kind of wacky in that case. So as of right now, like I said, not really expecting a big severe weather tornado threat or anything of the like. The next system comes in around the 24th, 26th time frame here. And notice the trough already is starting to fall apart by the time we get into the evening of the 24th. It holds itself together to where we could still have some shower and storm development, but it seems like a little bit more cold air kind of intrudes here, where if we were to try to look over towards the southern part of the Gulf states, maybe there could be an isolated severe storm or two, but the lifting mechanism that would be needed to kind of really feed on those storms just doesn't really seem to be there. Seems like everything's going to be kind of reserved to the north, where we don't have enough cold air mixing in. And if we were to move this forward here and try to match it up with the moisture, it's just not really there anymore. Like, you have 50-degree dew points, but like I said, without a good lifting source, which we'll probably see a frontal boundary from this maybe, but it's not going to be strong enough to really get anything of major significance going. Like, during any point in this time frame here, from just this one model I'm looking at, it just doesn't really match up in this situation. So, like I said, that's some of the intricacies when it comes to the whole forecasting deal here. But fact in the matter is, though, at least for right now, severe weather potential looks like it's going to remain on the lower end of the spectrum here. Now, of course, since, we're going to be looking at a big pattern change, we have to take a look at the temperatures here. So obviously it's really going to be more so towards the end of the model run where we're most interested. Obviously we're still going to get in the 70s. A lot of us are going to even see some 80s potentially at one point if you're over towards the Gulf Coast states. Out towards the west it's a little bit cooler than average, but we're kind of sitting right about at average or just a little bit above. Now here's where things start to get a bit more interesting, which is around that 24th to 26th time frame. That storm system enters. You can see the warm air out ahead of it. And then as time goes on here, as we go from the 26th onward, here comes the cold air. So we're seeing those temperatures starting to get into the single digits, even the teens for some of the areas for lows. Then eventually we even start to see that for a couple of highs up towards the higher elevations out west towards the Rockies. Then what interests me most, obviously, we're looking 16 days out in advance, but it's the simple fact that we have a pretty significant gradient between the warm and cold air. Big dividing line, if you will, that kind of pops up here. You're seeing the 60-degree temps here, and then you see the rapid change between there and about 15 degrees. So let's say this is over towards south central Missouri, where we're at 56. We go over here just a little bit past this little yellow line, and we're all the way down to 45. When you get those more rapid temperature drops, that's when you have those more notable systems here. Again, like I said, 16 days out, not really a lot of confidence to be had in that. In fact, at this range, only the GFS would have any sort of model data available to me to look at. By the time we get into tomorrow and we look at the Euro model, then we would probably be able to see a little something here. But like I said, at this range, not a whole lot of merit I can put into this. But given what I've seen at this point here, I would go as far as to say that somewhere around the deep south, around the beginning of December, could be a point of interest. So another thing that we'll need to pay close attention to. So let's go ahead and wrap this thing up real quick. I appreciate you all tuning in. By the way, we're going to take a look at the precip map, of course, before we close out the video here. So again, as I mentioned before, this week not going to be all that active. We're going to start to see some increase in rain chances out towards the east. Towards the west is where most of the action is going to be, mainly over towards the southwest. Towards the very end of the week, this is where we start to see our introduction to our first storm system. Like I said, not a whole lot in the way of showers and storms. Then out here we see this cutoff low kind of develop here because it's cut off from the main flow of the trough. And then eventually we start to see the increase in action occur towards the 25th. Do get a nice little line of storms to pop up. A lot of the snow mainly remains off to the north here, but it's after that low pressure and we get another low to interact with it and bring that cold into the equation where maybe the Great Lakes could start to get into the action once again. And then if this big storm system holds itself together, we could have some pretty significant action maybe with this towards the very end of the month. Like I said, everything's kind of up in the air with this, so take it with a grain of salt, but there are some changes coming. That much I can assure you. But appreciate you all being here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Make sure you get that notification bell on just in case YouTube does not automatically notify you when these videos come out. That being said, everyone have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I will see you in the next one. Take care and have a wonderful night.